The photograph was found in the hollow of an oak tree. The bark had grown around it, swallowing it whole some time after the war. When the storm of '89 ripped that tree apart, locals said the forest finally spat out what it could no longer keep. Inside a brittle frame, glass cracked, edges blackened with rot, was the image of a woman. Barely 20, in a hand-sewn cotton dress, her face ghostly pale beneath the grainy film. Behind her stood two men, one older, one younger. Both stared directly into the lens, their eyes almost identical. The back of the photograph was marked in shaky ink, Georgia, 1943, and below that a name that had been nearly erased by time, Martha Elkins. The air around the photo smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, old blood perhaps. Beneath the damp soil where it was found, investigators unearthed more: the corner of a children's shoe, a locket containing a lock of hair, and a torn page from a family Bible. The writing on the page was still legible, each birth written in the same careful hand. But the fathers' names were strange, repeated, crossed out, then written again. Those who saw the page spoke of a feeling they couldn't explain, the sense that these weren't just names of the dead, they were warnings. The locals around Candler County had always whispered about the Elkins family, tucked deep in the pine woods outside Metter. They said no one went near that farm after dusk. They said the lights never went out in the upstairs room, even after the house had long been abandoned. And when the photograph emerged, along with the Bible page, the story that had been buried for decades began to crawl its way back into the light. The woman in the photo, Martha, bore 2 sons during the last years of the war. The records say one died at birth. The other lived long enough to inherit everything that came before him, the curse, the silence, the truth no one dared speak. But who was the father, her brother, her father, or both? The Bible seemed to suggest something far darker, something the soil itself had tried to forget. The Elkins farm sat at the edge of Candler County, where the pines grew so thick they seemed to swallow sound. Locals said the trees there whispered when the wind passed through. Not like rustling leaves, but like voices, old ones, tired ones, and if you stood there long enough you could hear them call her name, Martha. The house itself was 2 stories of gray, rotting wood, its porch sagging like a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. It had been abandoned since 1956, though some swore smoke still curled from its chimney on cold mornings. The windows were painted shut from inside, and behind them people claimed to see movement, a silhouette passing by, pale and slow. Neighbors, the few who remained, remembered the Elkinses as quiet folk, too quiet. The father, Harland Elkins, was a veteran of the Great War, a man who came home broken and bitter. His wife, Clara, died young. Fever, they said. After that, it was just Harland, his daughter Martha, and his son Samuel, living in that hollow of trees. Some said the war had changed Harland, that he came back seeing ghosts. Others swore he brought something home with him, not a ghost but a darkness. Whatever it was, it settled in that house and never left. The county records show that after Clara's death, the family withdrew from the church, stopped attending town gatherings, stopped selling their crops. No one saw Martha in town after 1940. By 43, whispers had turned to stories, the kind you tell children to keep them close after sundown. It was said Harland would send Samuel to town for supplies, but the boy came back each time thinner, quieter, his eyes hollow. Some believed his father beat him. Others thought worse, that the family's sins were not of violence, but of blood. Old men sitting outside the Metter General Store spoke in half-truths and warnings. That family, one of them said, mixed the woolly wrong kind of kin. And when a midwife was called to the Elkins home one humid night in 1943, she left before dawn, white as a sheet, muttering to herself about the unnatural order of things. She never returned. The birth took place on a sweltering August night. The cicadas screamed in the woods outside, and the air inside the Elkins house hung thick with the smell of boiled linens and kerosene. The midwife, Evelyn Price, was 62 years old and had delivered half the county's children, but she would later tell her sister that what she saw in that house wasn't meant for this world. Martha was 21. Her father stood beside her bed, not pacing like a worried parent, but watching, expressionless, as if overseeing some grim duty. Her brother Samuel lingered in the doorway, his hands clenched white around the frame, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. When the child came, It did not cry. Evelyn had to strike it twice before it made a sound, and when she turned the infant toward the lamplight she gasped. Not because it was dead, but because it wasn't entirely right. The child's eyes were set slightly uneven, one larger than the other. Its jaw slanted. The nose seemed unfinished, as if the body had struggled to remember what a face was supposed to look like. Evelyn wrapped it quickly in a blanket and whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since her own mother's funeral. "What's wrong with him?" Martha asked, voice trembling. Evelyn didn't answer. She turned to Harland, the father, who only stared back. His gaze didn't flicker. He reached for the baby, and when Evelyn hesitated, he took it from her arms with surprising gentleness. "He's family," Harland said quietly. "That's all that matters." Evelyn left before the sun rose. She never returned to the Elkins home, never took another job past the county line. A week later, she packed her things and moved north to Savannah. When her sister asked why, she only said, "That family broke something sacred." The birth record lists the child's father as unknown, but the handwriting on the form matches Harland's own. And A's. At the bottom, faint but visible, there's another note, one that county officials ignored for decades. "Born of kin, conceal this." The child didn't live long. Locals said Harland buried it behind the barn, beneath the oldest pine. Yet those who passed the place at night swore they could hear crying in the trees, faint, hollow, never-ending. In 1951, 8 years after that terrible summer, Samuel Elkins turned himself in to the sheriff's office in Metter. Not for a crime, not exactly. He came carrying a small tin box wrapped in cloth, his hands shaking as though it burned him. The sheriff, old Ray Mathers, remembered him as a quiet boy, the kind that answered every question with a nod. But that night, Samuel looked different, pale, eyes sunken deep into his skull, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He said he'd come to confess. Inside the tin box was a folded letter, a photograph, and a ring carved from bone. The letter was written in a woman's hand, Martha's. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. He said it was God's will, that the family must stay pure, but I see what purity means now, rot beneath the skin. The sheriff read in silence. Then Samuel told him everything. About the nights his father would lock the doors and light candles in the parlor. About the words he muttered from the old Bible, pages torn and rearranged to suit his own gospel. About the nights Martha would disappear into her father's room, and the mornings she'd come out silent, pale as chalk, trembling. But the worst came later, after Harland's heart gave out in 45. The war had ended, and the county forgot about the Elkinses. Yet Martha was already showing again, belly swelling like an echo of that cursed summer. And this time, Samuel said, it wasn't their father's doing. "I couldn't let her be alone," he told the sheriff, voice breaking. "She said we was the only blood left clean." Sheriff Mathers didn't arrest him. He didn't even file a report. Instead, he told Samuel to leave the county and never come back. A week later, Samuel was gone. The Elkins farm was boarded up, the fields left to die. But the letter remained, sealed away in the sheriff's desk, forgotten until his death decades later. Hay and his grandson found it among yellowed files and dust. No one knew what to make of it. Some called it madness, others a hoax, but when they compared the handwriting to the Bible page found years later, it was the same. And in the margin of Martha's letter, faintly written, was a single line, "His blood is mine, and mine is his." By the 1960s, the Elkins farm had already become local folklore, the kind of place teenagers dared each other to visit at night, and preachers warned about in Sunday sermons. Yet no one stayed long on that land. Tenants who tried to move in left within weeks, claiming to hear voices in the walls, whispers coming from the floorboards when the wind blew through the cracks. In 1964, a couple from Savannah, the Turners, bought the property cheap. They wanted a quiet life, away from the noise of the city. But the quiet they found wasn't peace. It was the kind that breathes. Mrs. Turner wrote in her diary, later found among her estate, about hearing footsteps in the upstairs hall, though her husband was always asleep beside her. Some nights, she said, she heard a woman humming through the vents, an old hymn about redemption and rain. Other times it was a baby crying softly, the sound fading the moment she opened the nursery door. The smell came next, metallic and sweet, like rusted water and blood. It rose through the floorboards whenever the weather turned humid, and when Mr. Turner tried to dig a trench behind the barn to redirect the water, His shovel struck something wooden, buried deep. It was a box, rotted, the lid half gone. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bones, small ones, not animal. Alongside them lay a fragment of paper so old it disintegrated at his touch. Only a few words remained visible. "Forgive me. The blood won't wash." The Turners left that night, leaving everything behind, furniture, tools, even their car. They drove off in a borrowed truck and never returned. The house fell silent again, its windows staring blankly at the road. But locals said the silence wasn't empty. They said that if you passed the Elkins place on a still night, you'd hear 3 distinct sounds: a woman weeping, a man's low murmur, and the faint cry of an infant, repeating again and again. The county sheriff ordered the house sealed off in 1972, calling it a public hazard, yet every few years someone swore they saw lights flicker inside. Some say it's just moonlight on the glass. Others say the Elkins family never left. When genealogist Dr. Irene Calloway came to Candler County in 1993, she wasn't searching for ghosts. She was tracing Southern bloodlines for a university project, old family trees, census records, war rosters. But when she stumbled on the Elkins name, the paper trail twisted into something she couldn't explain. According to records, Martha Elkins gave birth twice, once in 1943 and again in 1945. The first child was recorded as stillborn. The second, unnamed, disappeared from the census after 1950. But a school attendance ledger from 1954 lists a Thomas E., or age 9, living on Old Elkins Road, and the signature of the guardian, Samuel Elkins. Dr. Calloway became obsessed. She tracked land deeds, grave markers, and medical reports. She found that several children in nearby counties, all bearing faint resemblances, all with birth defects or strange identical eye shapes, had mothers who listed no fathers. A few even shared a rare genetic marker that appeared only in the Elkins line. She followed the pattern through decades of death certificates and obituaries, her notebook filling with names: T. Elkins, R. Elkins, M. Tinsley, all branches of the same rotted tree. In 1995, she interviewed an old woman in a nursing home in Vidalia, a former midwife's assistant. When shown the photo of young Martha, the woman turned pale. "I saw her once," she whispered. "She came to town for medicine. Couldn't look anyone in the eye. Said her boy was sick. Said his skin wouldn't stop peeling." Dr. Calloway pressed her for more, but the woman only repeated one thing before refusing to speak again. They thought the curse ended with her, but curses don't end. They move. 2 months later, Calloway's car was found abandoned near the old Elkins property. Inside were her field notes, a recorder, and a single Polaroid. The image showed the house, or what was left of it, Colter's, apsed beneath vines and ivy, but in the window, faint and unmistakable, was a face, pale, watching. The genetic study she started was never published. The files were sealed by the university, labeled inconclusive. But those who knew her work said she believed at least one descendant still lived, someone who never left Georgia, someone carrying the blood that refused to die. They say the storm that tore through Candler County in the spring of 2003 unearthed more than trees. Lightning split the ground where the Elkins barn once stood, carving open the earth like a wound. A volunteer cleanup crew found the bones 3 days later, small, tangled, and bound in rotted cloth. The coroner's report listed them as infant remains, undetermined age, but it was what they found nearby that truly disturbed them. A tin locket, sealed shut with rust. Inside was a photograph, the same one found decades before, the one marked Georgia 1943. Yet this time there was something new, another picture tucked behind it. A young man, early 20s, standing beside a pickup truck with the words "Elkins Feed Supply" faintly visible on the door. The photo was dated 1981. DNA testing linked the remains to the Elkins bloodline, but not to the dead, to the living. The name that surfaced, Thomas Elkins, Jr., belonged to a man still residing just 40 miles north in Toombs County. He declined all interviews, refused DNA confirmation, and later vanished without a trace. His home was found abandoned, dishes still on the table, the radio humming softly with static. Investigators who entered the property described a peculiar smell, like old books and iron. On the mantel rested a single item, the torn page of a Bible, framed behind glass. Written across it in fading ink were the same words seen before: His blood is mine, and mine is his. Some believe Thomas was the last of them, the final heir to a curse that had stretched from the pine woods of 1943 into the modern age. Others whisper that he had a son, seen once in town with the same mismatched eyes that marked the Elkins line. The farm is gone now. The road where it once stood has been reclaimed by trees, but hunters who stray too deep into those woods still speak of strange cries, not animals, but something, human. A child's wail, thin and distant, and sometimes on nights when the air is heavy and still they say they see a light flicker deep among the pines, a lamp, swaying gently, as if someone were still searching, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for family, or maybe just for a name no one dares to speak anymore, because the soil remembers, and so does the blood.